in the morning, I was meeting somebody after a long time. I said, where do you work? He said, I work at Google. And he said, what do you do? I said, I Google at work. And the point being that if you Google at work, it's time to think about what next, right, in the corporate. That brings me to the topic here. What do we do in the corporate to move to the next level, right? And that's where we have Ramesh and Amit. So I'm going to dive straight into the conversation. Amit, we heard about your personal journey in the morning. Both of them represent a very distinct persona. And I'm going to just let them speak for about 2 or 3 minutes and focus on some of the pitfalls and what they kind of learned, right? You did from Kellogg, a top B school. A lot of people have a dream to kind of do a B school from US and then pursue their career. And then Ramesh, maybe you can go over to you with your slide. I know you're kind of present. So why don't we start with you, Amit?
I'll never lose sight of respect. Seniors always come first, Ramesh.
Oh, is it? Okay. Then I have to prompt for the slides. I know. If somebody can just go on the slides.
2 things. I'm not as dumb as I look. I'm not as old as I look. Yeah. So you are okay. I'm going to run through these slides just to give you a quick idea of my background because most of you don't know me. I'm not from the Bay Area. I've not had much of a career here. So in 3 minutes, I'm just going to run through quickly why I'm here and what the career is so that later on when I answer questions about career growth, we can place it in context. So you're ready, sir, with the slides? We're quickly going to run through it. Next slide, please. Yeah, so all my education, this is tough, let me get up. So all my education was in India, went to obviously IDBHU, studied on a scholarship, couldn't have afforded it without the scholarship, merit cum means. And in fact, one story I want to tell you, 1978, my first year, I broke 2 of my fingers in the sheet metal workshop, a rod fell on my hand, took off 2 of my fingers. And SS Hospital, Dr. Banerjee saved these 2 fingers. For 48 hours, they were going to cut off 2 of my left-hand fingers. So I'm eternally grateful to IDBHU. From there, went to IIM Bangalore directly. I didn't work in between. Couldn't afford it. Again, a company called TT Krishnamacharya and Sons paid for my education. That's how I got through. No education in the US other than a 2-month advanced management program at the Harvard Business School. Next slide, please. So so I was working in India for about 3-4 years, then took up software in 1987, came to US as a contract programmer in 88, and I've been through every designation you can have. Contract programmer, junior analyst, senior analyst, specialist analyst, project manager, development manager. I've been through the whole thing. 10 years in LA, mostly across Mattel Toys and Bugle Boy. Next slide, please. Then in April 1998, I joined this company called Manhattan Associates in Atlanta, supply chain execution. I joined them on the day they went live, they went public in 1998. All my experience, most of it is in public companies. I was already 38 years old that time, and I just joined as a director. And in the next 7 years, in spite of many software companies collapsing in 2000, 2001, Manhattan Associates just kept going. Revenue multiplied 7 times or 6.5 times in the next 7 years. And I went from director to senior director to VP to senior VP to executive VP in about 4.5 years. As CEO, I worked there. Next slide, please. Took me to a struggling company called Bally Technologies in Las Vegas, which is where I'm still based. This was a really struggling company for a long time, a $10 stock. I was responsible for the systems division, which went through a massive uptake in the 6, 7, 9 years that I was responsible for it. In spite of the 2008 collapse, when the whole economic collapse, that company continued to do well. Next slide, please. So Bally Technologies during that time was one of the best performing stocks. It went from a $10 stock to an $83 stock in those 9 years, completely outperforming S&P 500 and outperforming all our competitors. Next slide, please. And then I joined Agilysys as a CEO Jan 2017, and we focus on hospitality software solutions. It was a struggling company for a long time. For one reason or the other, I've become a turnaround guy. We had 9 consecutive quarters sequentially increasing revenue, and then COVID hit. We are entirely dependent on hospitality, so our entire customer base was shut down. So our revenue went down for the last 2 quarters. We have reported record revenue. We are a public company again. Next slide, please. So a struggling company for a long time really took off in the last 5 years or so. Next slide, please. So one quick piece of data for you. We started turning around this company in Jan 2017. If you had put $10,000 Jan 2018 in any of these companies, you would have done better with Agilysys than even with Palo Alto Networks, that's a slight elbow. Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Twitter, Adobe, Oracle, we have outperformed all those stocks for a 5-year period. But none of you know about this company. And one thing this company has done in the last 5 years, we have modernized all our products. Of one code base, we support both on-premise and SaaS. There was a lot of discussion about moving from on-premise to SaaS. We support both of one code base. So we run an ambidextrous organization because hospitality, many customers still want to remain on-premise, so we don't have a choice. Now the two companies we avoided in this bar chart are Zscaler and Tesla. We still can't compete with them, but we are getting there. Thank you. That's my background. I'll expand on it further. Thanks. Thank you.
So if you can take on, maybe I would kind of embed a question into that. I think I talked about you doing an MBA from US. A lot of us, especially, I don't know if things have changed, but always had this concept of, hey, let's do MBA to kind of accelerate our career. So if you can blend that part into your profile as to did it really help, or it will be helpful for the audience.
Sure. No, I think, so if I can step back, I think when I was talking in the morning, obviously, in my life journey, there have been certain accidental things that happen. And then, if you remember the word self-awareness that I used in the morning, to me, every time I was at a different stage of my life, I kind of reflected back as to what am I good at? Basically, you just had a VC conversation, product market fit. Do you, what kind of who you are? So you got to have a little bit of a product market fit discussion with yourself. And I remember my first job, as I said in the morning, was on the shop floor for Steel Plant. And as great and gratifying that it was, I realized that it was not a great job for life. And my wife, who was my, girlfriend at that time, she had a cushy job, and I felt like that's a wrong place to be. And then I ended up at Infosys, and I realized that I'm a terrible programmer. As much as I could program, I couldn't be good at it. So for me, and I always wanted to go into business side of things, but I felt it was clearly telling me that those kind of things are never going to be something I will be great at. I can be good at them, but I won't be great at them. So I made a conscious decision that I wanted to be a product guy in a tech landscape, but I wanted to be the business person, which I enjoyed. And hence, I kind of, again, as I said, if I compress everything in a 30-second answer, for me, my experiments taught me my self-awareness and reflection of what I'm good and bad and not faking it to myself was important for me. And then I basically came to this, and coming to the US and doing an MBA was purely by chance. I followed my wife, frankly speaking. I literally followed her. She left for the US to do her master's, and I was left with no choice that if I was going to be with her, I had to come here. So I came here and I worked. I had no money myself. Going to MBA in the US, game for the faint-hearted. I had no money. I actually, and I will use this word at a later point forward, I actually met someone who was extremely generous to co-sign a loan for me for my first year, because at that time business school did not give you loans for international students. And I went to business school, and frankly speaking, I really felt it taught me a lot. And not that it taught me anything functional as much as I think about life now, but it taught me what running a business is, and I enjoyed it, and I could blend it with the technical part of it and come out. So it clearly helped me figure out the right concoction of what I wanted in my career. But I still will say that with conviction that it is not necessarily the only way to succeed. Actually, frankly speaking, I said in the morning, the less than 5% of Silicon Valley successful folks are business people. But for me, through my attempts, learnings, experimentations, reflections back, it was the right thing.
No, I think it kind of connects to the point that you made in the morning. I was hearing in and out that the innovation part that you touched upon, and you touched upon vision being very important. Somewhere I hear that have a vision, try to experiment and move on. But somebody is that MBA is good to have, but it's not necessary for that exploration that you're talking about. Instead of me talking, I'm going to just ask if anyone in the audience have a question. Otherwise, I have a bunch of questions myself. But I would rather prefer, I see a hand there. Jagdish, if you can just pass on the mic to that table. You can see, I think, Ashish.
We shared a hostel together.
Oh, is it? So you really had a tough question, I guess. I don't know.
Hey, Amit and Ramesh. I have actually two questions for both of you. So, first question: has your career grown steadily over the years, or did you guys have an inflection point where your career growth accelerated suddenly? That's the first question. The second is, what's next for you? What do you see you doing 5 years from now?
You want to go Ramesh first?
Sure. So I would divide my career into three parts. The first part, academically, it was pretty good. BHU I did fairly well, and IIM Bangalore I did fairly well. After that, it was a false start. I was working in business consulting. Then I went and managed a foundry for a couple of years, which was plagued by labor trouble. I was just 26 years old. The management was fighting with each other among the owners, and there was a CITU union being formed, and I was asked to save that foundry, which we did. It got sold to private equity. But I had no mentors. First guy in my dad's ancestry to ever go to college. Very poor family, didn't know anyone. There was no mentor, nobody I could go to for advice, nothing at all. So I sort of gave it up and decided I'm taking up programming. I've had enough of this management nonsense. It's too political. I can't handle it. I'm not a politician. So I took up programming. So the first phase of my career, I would say, was a false start. Was a car struggling to start, right? And I didn't know any better. I didn't know how to go to, nothing. Then I took up software. In fact, Narayana Murthy himself interviewed me and convinced me to take up software. Came to the US. And between 1988, when I came here in 1998, I would call it steady growth. Contract programmer to analyst, to senior analyst, to specialist analyst. Then I became director of IS. But I have, all through my career, I've never gone and asked anyone for a promotion. I've never wanted a promotion. I've never thought about the next step. I just enjoyed work as much as I enjoyed playing cricket in LA for those 10 years. Just had fun at work. I enjoyed being a programmer. I was a pretty good programmer at that time. So that was steady growth till the age of 38. Then the call came from Manhattan Associates saying, now you have to join us. One of the founders was a former colleague of mine at Infosys in 87. So he said, no, Ramesh, there's no choice. Forget about LA. I know you're having fun there. You must move to Atlanta. I joined there, and at the age of 38, my career just took off. Now, I don't know what I did different. The next 5 years, it went off like a rocket. And from then, I've been so lucky since 1998 that I can't stop the luck now. It just keeps going on. So from 1998 till now has been very lucky, and I just kept growing. I never went and wanted to be a CEO. I didn't even want to be a COO, but they kept forcing me into it. No, Ramesh, you're the right guy to do this. So that's how it went. Now, what next? I remember once in March 2005, November 2005 or so, one of the directors of Valley came and asked me, Ramesh, what are your career goals? What do you want to be 5 years from now? I said, forget it. I have no career goals, nothing. I've never been right in my life predicting n plus 5. I've never predicted in 88 what I'll be in 93, 92 what I'll be in 97. It's never been right, so why bother? I'm not going to worry. I have no career goals. But he said, you have to have some some goals. I said, I want Bally Systems to be number one. It was a struggling company. I hated IGT's arrogance at that time. They never took us seriously. The only goal I had was Bally Systems needs to be number one. What the heck happens to my career? Frankly, I don't give a damn. Right? That was my attitude. So today, if you ask me, I have no goals for the next 5 years, other than the fact I want Agilysys. We have done all the hard work of modernizing our products to really take off. And it really bothers me that our share price is not doing as well as Zscaler and Tesla, like I showed you. Competitive guy. So all I know is I want Agilysys to do well in the next 5 years, and I really don't care about my own career.
Amit, your take.
So I think, Ashish, like anything in life, I think you can never, there's nothing is a linear line, right? I think I don't think I'm saying anything that anybody in this room hasn't experienced. So to your first question, I've found times to be very candid in my career where I felt like I hit a wall. I think I mentioned that the morning too, there was a particular phase in my career where I felt like I was going to get fired. I remember trying to blame the surrounding around me, but again, as I reflected, I felt like there was something I didn't figure it out, and I felt like, okay, this is going to be the be-all, end-all. But I think the key part to me is not whether it's a straight line, it's a step function. I think it's ultimately what do you want out of life? And I'll begin by first saying, accidentally, two people sitting here have ended up being CEOs. First of all, the key thing is, do you want to be a CEO? What do you want to be? Everybody's aspiration is different. We're talking about a commercial enterprise sitting in this room, but very well people could have a desire that by at certain point in life I'm going to turn on and do something very different. So I think being very clear what you want is a fundamentally important thing. I was having this conversation with by the way, anything I say, my elder son and I have philosophical conversations. I asked him the same question. Life ain't necessarily that you want to be a great commercial success, pile up a lot of money as an example, or you feel like you get a certain title. What actually gets you excited? And by the way, frankly speaking, most of you by this stage in life would have figured out that if you like something, if you're driven by it, you will enjoy it, and that will be the best thing that you would do. I think that's a very important thing. I've seen people dissatisfied, unhappy, because they end up choosing the wrong product market fit. So commercial success ain't the only definition of success in my mind. But yeah, there are many times I've hit a wall. At least 2-3 times that I can recall. I remember very well sitting in my early career and felt like, well, as a technologist, going back again, I'll use this one phrase. In your career, this is somebody gave me sage advice when I was leaving McKinsey, a very senior partner. He said, Amit, I'll give you one advice. You will only be successful based on how much you capitalize on your strengths. People spend inordinate amount of time worrying about their weaknesses. McKinsey was a very harsh, feedback-driven enterprise, by the way. But make sure you know your weaknesses and they don't become fatal flaws. That's when you will lose in life. Of course, you build a team around your weaknesses, but your weaknesses cannot become your fatal flaws, and your strengths are the only thing that will take you forward. So constantly in your career, you have to think, what are your strengths and how you can amplify them and make the most out of it, whatever path you choose. That's stuck with me, and that's what I carry even today.
So I'm going to come back to the audience once again. Just a quick follow-up question, Amit. Is a mentor or a boss with a good relationship, or both, or none, important for career?
I think all of them can be true. Mentors, a good boss, and a good friend, but somebody you can be honest with. I think more than anything, I believe that the mentor or a boss with whom you can actually be honest. Honesty is a very important thing in that specific process. And if somebody you cannot truly be honest with and actually share your fears and what you, sometimes very important to just say what you want, but not necessarily that you want it tomorrow, but that's your path. And how can somebody give you objective advice to go there? That's more important than having a mentor. Half the time people think of a mentor, I find a mentor, and that's going to be my step to the next step. That's not a mentor. That's a greedy relationship. So that's the way I'm getting.
Thank you, Amit. So I have time for 2 audience questions, and if I find only one, then I'll have another one from myself. So Ashutosh, I can see you knocking the mic. Yeah, please. Yeah.
Okay. So my question is to both of you. I've seen your profiles, and you've mentioned through your career journey as well that you made many switches in your professional career, right? So what's your take on in terms of deciding when it's the right time for you to switch? Amit, you mentioned in morning session that willpower is one of the most important thing, and it's more important than a skill. So I want to know from you and both of you is how do you decide when it's the right time to move on to another company or continue with more persistence?
Yeah, so one of the things that I would suggest in whether in personal life or professional life based on my own experience is patience. So first thing, we all need luck. There is no question. In order to carry, I've been extraordinarily lucky. My health has stood up. I've had a supportive family. I've been able to be a workaholic because my wife and my kids were very supportive. So first, luck is required. There's no question about it. I've been extraordinarily lucky in life, and that is why I'm very thankful to the institutions who gave me that luck. Let's leave that aside. In general, I think you need to be patient in your current job. There's an old saying in cricket, never run off a misfield unless it's a run and a half. Right? The first time there is a misfield at work, don't look to the exit. I was always patient. 7 years at Manhattan, 9 years at Valley, now 6 years at Agilysys, 5.5 years at Bugle Boy. I generally was patient and I've had terrible days. I've had angry days, I've had frustrated days, but I've never had a demotivated day because I never wanted the next step. I didn't want to be a VP. So I was not competing with 4 people to be a VP. Who am I to know whether he deserves it more or Puneet deserves it more? It never didn't occur to me. When they came and asked me to be a VP, I said, oh, you think I can handle it? I'll handle it. So be patient. The current job may not be as bad as you think it is. That's number one. Number two, I believe career growth does not depend on your boss as much as you think it is. My career went up because everybody else in the company wanted me. The sales team wanted me to come and do the technical presentation at Manhattan Associates. Customers, when they had a problem, said, can we talk to Ramesh about it? Because he's the most empathetic guy to customers. So there was all-round pressure on my boss to make sure that I'm treated well. So it doesn't depend entirely on your boss. Be patient. Don't take off on a run just because it's a misfield. But sometimes it's a real misfield. So don't make a quick decision about quitting, but you've been patient for a while, and you're clear it is not working out. That is probably the time for a change. And also remember, there is a phase difference between action and reward. You can't write a great program and say, how come they've not promoted me tomorrow? I just closed a great sale, how come next week they didn't promote me? It takes time. And very often, the good deeds you do in one place creates value in another. The good work I did in Infosys in 87, 88 got me the Manhattan job. The good work I did at Manhattan got me the Valley job. So before you quit, make sure the next step is actually a good step. Because a job you interview for is never the job you get. They don't deliberately lie, but they just can't tell you all the truth in a 45-minute to 2-hour interview. They just can't. So there are going to be surprises in the new job. So my suggestion would be patient with your current job. As long as you're producing value, success will come if you have a little bit of luck. If you're patient and it hasn't worked out, then make sure the next step you take patiently. Make sure it is better, check it out, and then take off for the run, right? Don't rush it, would be my suggestion. And always remember, action and reward, there is a phase difference. It doesn't happen immediately. For me, it only happened at the age of 40.
Thank you so much. Any last question from the audience? I'm going to get up because the slide is kind of bothering. Yeah.
Go ahead. I think Ramesh did it very well. I'll just add to the sides of it. I'll give you some specific examples. When you asked, when do you feel like it has happened? There are 2 instances, but I'll pick one. I remember when I left Symantec and I went to Intuit. I'd always been in enterprise B2B software. And I actually genuinely felt like I wanted to see consumer was a very different space, whether I like it or not. And I felt like it's software, I would give it a shot. And I went to Intuit. And I spent just exactly a full year. I knew consumer didn't excite me. I enjoyed the company. I loved the culture. I loved the people. In fact, my boss stayed in great terms, and I got her on my current board. So she's on my board, so the relationships were pretty good. But I just felt like consumer didn't excite me because I couldn't meet a customer, and I like to meet a customer. That's just kind of so I literally at the end of a year, I felt like I had to go, and I left. And I left, and I know it wasn't the point I was leaving. It was a bit hard to leave. Great company, great culture, but I knew the time was right because I just didn't feel excited about it. And again, clarity of what you want. So that was a great example of, as I said. But my boss from there is today on my board. Relationships you keep, and you should be very honest about why you're leaving. I was very honest with her that I did not like this consumer business. Period. And she respected me as much as she hated me leaving at that point. So I think I'll rest. I couldn't agree more with you that patience is critical. Luck is incredibly important. I feel like I was just having this conversation in the morning with some folks that I think people get very impatient about a reward instantly. I mean, enterprise software, at least the world we live in, is not necessarily an app where you get millions of downloads in a day and you can just immediately go see the result. It takes a little bit of time. So patience is key. And then lastly, I think a very famous person, Mahatma Gandhi, had this quote which I use a lot with my own teams. The future depends on what you do today. That's what Gandhi said. And the only word I added to that great man is, the future depends on what you do today, every day. just have to keep doing it every day. It doesn't happen only one day.
Any other question from the audience?
Puneet, Jayam.
Thank you. You know, I may be your seniors, but I'll ask you a question anyway. You know, I see that one of you had a base, like Bally's had a base, okay? Atlas had a base. You went and took that company from somewhere to even high heights. Informatica had a base and you took it somewhere else. Now, as long as you have a base, you kind of work with it, kind of go. What if we had a no base and we had to start anew, okay, like startup, like right from the founding? Would your principle work same way that is happening now, or you would use a different strategy in that case?
Yeah, so one clarification, Jayam sir. Bally, Manhattan was a growth challenge, but both Bally and Agilysys they were horrible bases. They were terrible bases. And it just so happened both of them struggled with the $10 share price for years and years. So they were terrible companies that had to be turned around. So that's a different matter. And for some reason, my career has become a turnaround thing. And a couple of words that I don't know the meaning of is startup and exit. I'm an organization builder. I don't even know what the heck the word meaning of exit is. Right? And I've never been a startup. My career has been from 40 million annual revenue to about 1.3 billion annual revenue or so. So I have no idea, right? I have no experience. I can only comment on reasonably well-formed organizations. If they are in trouble in B2B enterprise software, what are the things you can do to turn it around? That's what my knowledge base is. So startup, I'm not qualified to comment on it at all. My knowledge base is zero.
Yeah, I'm not a startup guy myself. I just did one once and didn't go anywhere for me when I came to the US. So I don't know exactly what you're, but I think the only thing I can add to that is that within an existing organization, and Ramesh mentioned quite a bit, and I said that in the morning too, that the successful organizations go through their own startup phase naturally. No organization can ever grow consistently for decades without actually having to reinvent themselves internally. So, I always joke, we have this conversation internally within the company, right? Because we have startups who compete with us, that the word innovation is naturally synonymous with a startup, and startups innovate till the day they go bankrupt. But I don't think innovation or startup concept is just for a company that gets funded by a VC and has an exit. It happens naturally in large companies too. And by the way, forget our companies. Obviously, we're going to be biased with our own companies. Look around the world. I mean, large companies like Apple, they are nothing else but great startups within them. I mean, they may have their ecosystem, but so I think every time you have to reboot yourself, I do believe that every 3 to 4 years, a company has to naturally go through a metamorphosis of its own. Otherwise, you will not survive. No company can live for 10 years without having to internally go through a startup phase. You'll die.
Right. So just to add to that, for example, if you take Agilysys today, every product we're implementing in the field today was coded in the last 3 years at best. So we had to take a company that was very old products, 80s, 90s product, completely re-engineer them. So every product we are installing today was written or coded in the last 2-3 years. So in that sense, we are a giant startup that is not funded by a VC or a PE firm, but funded by our old products. And to Murli's point that you first have to sell, then you have to create the product, we already have the customers. We know what they need. So it is a giant startup in a sense, but the challenges are very different from a ground-up startup. So you can't compare the two. But ours in a sense is a startup, but a very different kind of startup.
Thank you, Ramesh. I think that was very apt. JMG, I think having a small base, as you rightly said, the innovation in a phased manner in a large organization, everybody reinvents the brand. Amit and Ramesh are going to be with us. I'm assuming you're here with us in the evening. One of the things that we talked about, you got to interact and learn outside of the stage sessions. But I would still want to see if there's any last question from the audience. Go ahead, Shilpi. Can you come?
The journey both of you have taken to be where you are is incredible. You've gone through that journey. You're now in a position of leadership where you can effect change for your companies. What are your views in terms of things that you could be doing or have already started to implement that will enable successful corporate careers for others that you think otherwise aren't naturally inclined to get there?
He's harping on the fact that I'm older than him on each question. Yeah, so there are a couple of things we can do to enable career growth in the company, and as a CEO, that's something you worry about every day, right? People is what, I mean, I'll put it this way. Nothing depresses me more than somebody quitting the company, right? If you think about all the bad news I get as soon as I wake up, because we are B2B enterprise software, there's always 3 customers who are unhappy with you. So every day you wake up at 5 o'clock, you look at emails, there's bad news there. Of all the bad news, the most depressing is somebody leaving the company, right? That means you didn't do the job. So these are the things we can do to enable career growth for others. Number 1, grow the company. Nothing creates career paths than growing the company. If you just stagnate, like when I took over, it was 125 million. This year we have guided to 190 to 195 million. In between, COVID hit us very badly, and we are beginning to grow again. The more the company grows, the more the career opportunities are. And we do our best to internally promote. We do our best. That's one thing you do. The second thing you do is make sure you create an environment that makes everyone safe and secure. Women, minorities, whatever else, right? Handicap, people who need support, whatever the terminologies are, challenge this way, challenge that way. We must create an environment which is safe and secure for everyone to thrive. Recently, we let go of one of our top performers because of misbehavior. There's no compromise there. We didn't want to let that person go, but misbehavior towards women, we just will not tolerate. So you have to create an environment where people feel safe and secure. Also, you create an environment where people have the freedom to walk into your room and say, Ramesh, you're an idiot. This is the wrong thing to do. Now, we may not take that idea, but they must have the freedom to say so. And we almost go the other extreme. If I'm an emotional guy, I go up and down, and there are people who get emotional with me. A meeting gets bad. That person is automatically protected. We don't want any kind of a culture statement that person got mad with Ramesh, therefore they got fired. It's never going to happen. So you create a safe and secure environment. You're always fair with all your judgments, and you grow the company. You do all of that, career paths get created.
I couldn't agree more. I think the only other thing I'll add, Shilpi, to your question is that, again, a very practical, pragmatic thing that at least I try to do is, especially in organizations that are larger, and let's just say, if you just kind of pick a certain leadership level, making sure that you are in some accidental way or in a programmatic way, you're also always connecting with your critical leaders. For example, it's not, I always tell my own teams that skip levels are not meant to get a performance evaluation from them. They're actually meant more to make sure you can give motivation to people who may be 3 levels below. And the second one is that, it's quite interesting that remembering what an individual has done well and giving them honest compliment for that. But at the same time, I mentioned that in the morning, honesty is critical, especially people know when people are being honest or not. But if they haven't done something well and they're a key leader in the company, giving them the honest feedback that you expected more from them. Not for the sake of the company, for the sake of them, because they are better than what they did if they did not do a good job. And I think that as we all start moving up the ladder, that honest feedback is the thing that first disappears. Either there is, I call it fake compliments, or the idea is not to give someone critical feedback and at some point somebody runs out of their career and either they leave the company. I think those are the things, and I do think that that's a hard balance to find because individuals can also not be very comfortable in taking it. But I think that's the one thing that I try to do. Never perfectly, but it's an attempt.
Thank you so much, Amit and Ramesh. I think it's very insightful. So, just to kind of sum it up, I was just trying to see. I think there are 4 or 5 things that emerged from the whole conversation. Some level of vision, some clarity is needed, but you got to experiment. And the reason you got to experiment, that brings to the second point, accidents will happen. And it is okay, it's positive, because there is a luck that plays a role. And you can't just not do things and say that your luck will play a role, right? Third, empathy, of course, relationships, open culture you talked about, let people come in and talk to you. That's important, and that includes boss, mentor, or whomsoever, because in your board next time. And then I think the last and my favorite was, patience. I kind of read through some of these scriptures here and there while running. Do something, but don't get attached to it. It's difficult in corporate world because doing something and saying that reward will come over a period of time, we don't even know what is that finite time. It's hard. I want to ask promotion next year because that's logical break, but it could come in 2 years. Or a friend of mine will meet me on the meet and he'll say, I want to hire you. That is better than promotion. So with that, I would say those are the 4 points I would remember, and I'm sure you all will. And with that, I want to thank both Amit and Ramesh. I've been following Amit for a long time. Ramesh, I came to know the meet. Pleasure to meet you. Thank you.